The chamber smelled like rust and ash, the scent of old metal and something burnt deep into the walls. Dozens of alien eyes watched each other across the circular table, some glowing like molten gold, others blinking in erratic patterns that meant hostility in their native tongues. The seats were filled with the powerful warlords, chancellors, heads of fleets that had reduced worlds to rubble. None of them liked one another, but today they were united by single purpose: the extermination of humanity. The word human was spoken like a disease here. Across the galaxy, it was the species they feared and hated the most. Fear, because humans had been unpredictable and war, reckless, stubborn, impossible to fully subdue. Hate, because when the Great War ended 50 years ago, the victors thought they had wiped Earth clean, and yet small rumors kept surfacing. Ships raided in the outer rim, comms intercepted with a strange language, whispers of survivors. Sitting among them, wearing the black uniform of the Karak delegation, was a man who didn't belong. His name wasn't on any registry, and the face he wore wasn't his own. Synthetic skin, bone splicing altered eye color, all bought with blood and stolen tech. Outwardly, he looked like a lean, sharp-featured Karak officer, complete with the 4 ceremonial slashes tattooed down his neck. Inwardly, every nerve screamed with contained rage. His name, his real one, was Daniel Ross, and he was human. The Council of Species droned on, each leader taking turns, spitting out new ideas on how to finish the job they thought they'd already done. The Sithrime representative suggested hunting suspected refugee colonies in the asteroid belts. Reptilian general across the table proposed releasing a bioweapon engineered to mimic human DNA, so if any were hiding among other races, they'd die choking on their own blood. Daniel sat still, shoulders squared, voice silent. Every instinct told him to reach for the blade hidden inside the seam of his left boot and start cutting throats, but killing them all now would be easy and pointless. A dozen more like them would rise from the shadows. No, he had come here for something better than quick revenge. He had come for the kill that would echo across the stars. The Karak chancellor beside him leaned close and muttered in their language. "You seem tense, officer. Have the humans gotten under your skin as well?" Daniel forced the alien's stiff nasal accent out of his altered throat. "If they're alive, they don't deserve to be." The lie slid smoothly, though his hands itched. The meeting centerpiece was a massive hollow map floating above the table, the galaxy littered with bright red sectors marked as search zones. Daniel watched it spin slowly, eyes tracing one point near the Perseus arm. He knew what was there: not a human colony, not a base. Something far worse if the Council found it, something that could erase the last trace of his people. They didn't know yet. The chamber door sealed behind them with a heavy clang. There was no leaving until the session ended. Daniel studied every face, every twitch, every rival sneer. All it would take was one slip, one wrong movement for them to realize he wasn't one of them, and if they realized, he'd have to start the killing early. The hollow map kept spinning in the center of the chamber, throwing pale light across the stone walls and reflecting in the eyes of creatures who'd burned entire worlds for less than a grudge. Daniel's gaze stayed fixed on the red sector near the Perseus arm. The others saw it as just another potential sweep zone, but he knew what sat in the cold Dark there, Athena Station, a hidden archive vault buried deep inside a hollowed asteroid. It carried the last intact database of pre-war Earth. Knowledge, medical research, military strategies, engineering blueprints, and the files for weapons humanity never got to build. If they found it, the Council would erase everything, not just human life, the memory of it. He had one shot to make sure that never happened. The Carrick Chancellor beside him raised a clawed hand. "I propose," the Chancellor said in his rasping insectal voice, "we focus our next strike in Sector Gamma 42. Gamma 42, the Perseus arm." Daniel didn't move. His pulse, however, hammered in his ears. The motion caused murmurs to ripple around the table, a towering threaks. Warlord leaned forward, his scaly arms flexing. The humans would not hide. They're too exposed, too close to patrol lanes. The Chancellor clicked his mandibles. Perhaps, but that is why they might, too, hide in plain sight. Daniel could feel the moment balancing on a knife edge. If the Council voted to search there, Athena Station's days were numbered. But if he opposed the motion too aggressively, someone might start asking why Carrick officer cared enough to resist. He needed a diversion. When the Scyther Prime representative took the floor, Daniel's eyes slid to the hollow map's control orbit, the center days. It floated a meter above the ground, shifting with every speaker's command. If he could override its targeting system, he could redirect the Council's attention somewhere else entirely, somewhere dangerous enough to keep them occupied for months. But to get to it, he'd have to leave his seat. And the chamber's guards weren't the type to let a delegate stroll around. Mid-session, the opportunity came faster than he expected. Halfway through the Scytha's proposal, one of the chamber's automated drones drifted in from the side corridor carrying a tray of hydration flasks for the attendees. One passed in front of him, the dull hum of its hover engine filling the momentary lull in conversation. Daniel let his clawed hand sweep just wide enough to accidentally knock the drone off balance. It jerked sideways, spilling 2 flasks across the floor. Slick of pale green fluid spread under the table, pooling near the feet of the Rajan envoy. The Rajan, a gelatinous mass of transparent flesh, recoiled violently, knocking over his own chair. With a slop of movement, perfect chaos. "I'll handle it," Daniel muttered to the Chancellor beside him, standing before the Carrick could protest. He circled the table, moving like a man in control of an unimportant mess. But when he passed behind the Scytha Prime's seat, his pace slowed just long enough for his left hand to brush the Holop's control orb. Inside his boot, the hidden blade wasn't the only weapon. In the heel, barely detectable even to scanners, was a compact hacking spike. He pressed his heel against the orb for less than 2 seconds, just long enough to inject a cascade of override code into the system's nav routing AI. He moved on, collected the spilled flasks, righted the Rajan's chair, and returned to his seat. By the time the Scytha finished his speech, the hollow map shimmered, flickered, and recalibrated. The Perseus arm disappeared from the priority red markings, replaced instead by a cluster of glowing crimson dots along the far edge of the outer rim. The chamber reacted exactly as Daniel had hoped. Voices rose in intrigue and hostility. Someone demanded to know why those sectors weren't already being patrolled. The Thrax warlord slammed a fist into The table declaring those zones infested with illegal trade and unclaimed tech that could fund human insurgents. The vote was quick and unanimous. The outer rim sweeps would commence immediately. Athena Station was safe for now, but his relief was short-lived. When the session recessed, Daniel stood to leave, only to find himself intercepted by a tall, thin figure in a deep red cloak. The cloak's cowl hid most of the alien's face, but the voice that came from within was low, deliberate. "You're not Carrick," it said in perfect trade tongue. The words hit like a knife to the ribs. Daniel didn't flinch. "And you are a watcher," the figure replied. "I saw you touch the orb." He let a slow breath out, keeping his expression neutral. "I was cleaning up a spill." The cloaked alien gave a soft chuckle, as if amused at the attempt. "I don't care why you did it, but I know you changed the vote, and I know the Carrick wouldn't risk the wrath of the Threx without a good reason." Daniel's hand twitched toward his boot. The cloaked figure noticed. "You could try to kill me here," the alien continued, "but then you'd never know what I know about your Athena Station." That froze him. The alien leaned in just close enough for him to smell something sharp and metallic, like burnt ozone. "Meet me at Docking Bay 9 after the third chime." Alone. Before Daniel could respond, the figure was gone, vanishing into the stream of delegates spilling from the chamber. Back in his assigned quarters, Daniel checked the lock twice before stripping the Carrick uniform's upper layers and pulling a thin membrane scanner from a hidden compartment in the wall. It was a human device, old and patched together, but it still hummed softly when activated. He ran it over his own body, scanning for tracking tags. None good. The cloaked alien's words wouldn't. His mind, whoever they were, they knew too much, enough to ruin everything if they spoke to the wrong set of ears, but that also meant they were useful, at least until Daniel figured out their angle when the third chime came, echoing faintly through the station's metallic corridors. He was already halfway to Docking Bay 9. The bay was nearly empty, save for a row of cargo haulers and a lone maintenance skiff. The cloaked alien stood near the edge of the docking ring, staring out at the dark expanse beyond the station's shield barrier. "You came," the figure said without turning. Daniel stopped 3 paces behind him. "Talk." The alien reached into the folds of his cloak and produced a small hexagonal data crystal. "This contains a fragment of the Athena Station access codes. Without them, your archive will be nothing but dead stone." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Why give this to me?" "Because," the alien said slowly, "I want you to burn the council from the inside, and I think you've already started." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low. "And what do you get out of it?" The figure finally turned, lowering the cowl just enough to reveal deep, jagged scars across what had once been a symmetrical face. One eye was a cybernetic implant, faintly glowing. "Humans didn't kill my family. The council did during one of their cleansing campaigns. I've been waiting for someone who hates them as much as I do." Daniel considered the crystal in the alien's hand. Taking it meant trust, something he hadn't given in years. It also meant tying himself to someone whose motives could shift like sand underfoot. But if the alien was telling the truth, the codes could make Athena Station not just a vault but a weapon. He took the crystal. "Then we have a deal," Daniel said. Alien smiled faintly. For now, when Daniel returned to his quarters, he didn't sleep. He sat, cross-legged on the floor, the data crystal resting on his palm, and thought about the dangerous road he had just stepped onto. Every move now would be a balancing act between keeping his cover and advancing towards the real kill. The next council session was scheduled for the following day, and Daniel knew exactly what his next play would be, not just to protect Athena Station, but to plant the seed of their own destruction in the minds of every alien at that table. He would make them fear humans again. And this time the fear wouldn't fade. The data crystal was small enough to vanish in a closed fist, but to Daniel, it felt heavy, heavy with potential, heavy with danger. He'd spent the night scanning it with every scrap of stolen tech in his possession, cross-referencing symbols and encryption patterns against what little human code archives he'd memorized over the years. It was genuine, not a perfect set of keys, but a start. It also meant the cloaked alien wasn't bluffing. By morning, Daniel had already decided his next move. The council might have been distracted from the Perseus arm for now, but distractions never lasted. The only way to keep Athena Station safe long-term was to make the council look inward, to make them so paranoid and divided that hunting humans would become a luxury they couldn't afford. That meant planting a seed, and seeds grew best in fertile soil, or in this case, suspicion and fear. The chamber's stone doors swung open with their usual grinding noise, and delegates filed in. Daniel took his assigned seat beside the Carrick Chancellor, noting who entered first, who lingered outside, who avoided whose gaze. Small tells, but in a room where alliances were brittle, those tells could be sharpened into blades. The first order of business was routine. Fleet reports, budget allocations, trade sanctions against rebel systems. Daniel let it wash over him while he studied the hollow map above the table. His hack from yesterday had held. The Perseus arm still showed no red marks, but sooner or later someone would notice the inconsistency and push to correct it. That was when Daniel spoke for the first time all session. Honored delegates, he began using the Carrick's clipped precise accent. Before we commit further resources to the outer rim sweeps, I believe we should address a more immediate concern. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. The Three's warlord leaned forward. And what concern would that be? Daniel met his gaze without flinching. The possibility that humans are already here in this station among us. Effect was instant. Murmurs rippled through the room like a low growl. The Rajan envoy's gelatinous body quivered visibly. The Sitha Prime representative hissed a word Daniel didn't catch, but the meaning was clear. Suspicion. The Carrick Chancellor beside him bristled. You imply the council has been infiltrated. I imply nothing, Daniel said evenly. I state a probability. We know humans are adaptable, capable of passing for other species with sufficient technology and preparation. The war taught us that much. If they have survived, why wouldn't they infiltrate their greatest enemy? The Threx warlord's eyes narrowed to slits. If you have evidence, present it. If not, you insult this body with baseless fear-mongering. Daniel allowed the faintest suggestion of a smile to touch his borrowed features. Evidence can be manufactured, so can trust. The only way to be certain is to test every delegate here. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices, outrage, suspicion, demands for Procedure. The Roan envoy slammed a dripping appendage on the table, calling for security sweeps. The Scytha Prime demanded to know who would conduct these tests, hinting that letting one species oversee the process would lead to abuse. Exactly the reaction Daniel wanted. By midday, the council had split into factions over the proposed infiltration sweeps. No one wanted to admit they were against the idea, not when fear of humans was a convenient political shield, but no one trusted anyone else to run the scans. Daniel sat silent while the arguments spiraled. Every raised voice, every pointed finger was a fracture widening in the council's foundation. And then the opening came. The Threx warlord, in a display of performative dominance, offered to have his own fleet medics conduct the tests. The Scytha Prime scoffed, calling the Thres brutes who can't tell one warm blood from another. The warlord stood towering over the table, claws flexing. Daniel shrugged. If the warlord's fleet is so confident in its abilities, he said loud enough to cut through the noise, perhaps they can demonstrate by scanning a random delegate here now. The warlord sneered, glancing around the table. His eyes landed on the cloaked alien. Perfect. The alien said nothing as a Threx medic, a hulking figure with spined arms, moved toward him carrying a portable scanner. The device was crude, but functional, capable of reading skeletal structure, organ placement, DNA fragments, the kind of tech that could expose a disguise like Daniel's in seconds. Daniel's heart rate spiked, but outwardly he didn't move. The cloaked alien was his only tenuous ally, but this was a gamble he had to take. If the scan cleared him, it would cement the infiltration threat as a paranoia tool. If it didn't, well, Daniel could work with chaos. The medic activated the scanner. A blue beam swept over the alien's frame. Data lines scrolled across the hollow display and then froze. Corruption detected, the medic growled. Data incomplete, the warlord roared. You bring tampered equipment into the chamber. The Scytha Prime pounced, instantly accusing the threats of deliberately sabotaging the scan to protect an infiltrator. The Roan envoy sloshed forward, demanding an independent analysis. Cloaked alien simply pulled his cowl lower and said nothing. The room dissolved into shouting again. When the session finally adjourned, Daniel caught up with the cloaked alien in the side corridor. You knew it would fail, Daniel said flatly. The alien's scarred mouth twitched in something like a grin. Of course, you think I'd walk into that without safeguards? Daniel studied him for a moment. You realize you just made yourself the council's favorite suspect. That's fine, the alien said, pulling something small and metallic from inside his cloak. He pressed it into Daniel's palm, a micro-ampule sealed in glass. They'll focus on me, which means they won't be looking at you. Daniel slipped the ampule into his sleeve without looking at it. What is it? Insurance, the alien said. Neurotoxin keyed to Threx biology in case you ever need to make an example. Daniel didn't ask how the alien had acquired something that specific. He didn't need to. The next day, the council met under heavier guard. 2 squads of security drones hovered around the chamber's perimeter, their targeting lenses tracking every movement. The atmosphere was thick, every delegate now aware that the possibility of a human infiltrator was no longer abstract. Daniel waited until the session reached The topic of the outer rim sweeps before. Speaking again. I propose, he said, that the sweeps be delayed until the infiltration threat is resolved. Sending fleets out now risks spreading the infection of humanity. Further, the phrase infection of humanity hit exactly as he intended. Half the room bristled, the other half nodded grimly. The Threx warlord slammed a claw against the table. Delay means weakness. If humans are among us, all the more reason to hunt the rest of them down. Daniel let the warlord's words hang for a beat before leaning forward. And if humans are among us, how long before they sabotage the fleets from within? Silence, the kind that meant the thought, had taken root. He could see it now, the idea spreading like cracks in ice. Every commander in the room suddenly imagining their crews compromised, their ships hijacked, their missions undone before they began. The Scyther Prime voiced what they were all thinking. Until every delegate is verified, the fleets remain docked. And just like that, Daniel had frozen the Council's most aggressive arm. Without firing a shot, after the session, Daniel walked the long curve of the station's residential ring, taking the less patrolled maintenance corridors. The cloaked alien was waiting where they'd agreed, in the shadow of a sealed bulkhead. You're doing well, the alien said. They're starting to see humans in every shadow. That's the point, Daniel replied. Paranoia slows them down. Alien's cybernetic eye warred softly. You're buying time for Athena Station. Daniel didn't confirm or deny. You turn the codes. How much more do you have? The alien's expression shifted. Not quite reluctance, but something close enough to get you inside the outer vault, not enough to open the archives. Then get me the rest, Daniel said. Council's distraction won't last forever. The alien tilted his head. You're planning more than just protecting your archive, aren't you? Daniel's eyes hardened. I'm planning to end the Council permanently. For a long moment neither spoke. Then the alien nodded once. Good. That night Daniel sat at his quarters. Narrow desk, the data crystal linked to his stolen terminal. Lines of code scrolled past as he tested combinations, each failure bringing him closer to the patterns that might unlock the rest. The ampule the alien had given him sat beside the terminal, its glass surface catching the dim light. Neurotoxin keyed to Threx biology. Daniel didn't know when he'd use it, only that it would be soon. He pictured the Threx warlord's smug, scaled face, and he smiled. Tomorrow he'd make his first kill. The glass ampule sat between Daniel's fingers like a promise. The neurotoxin inside shimmered faintly, a pale green that caught the dim light of his quarters. It didn't take much to kill a Threx. Their biology was vicious in war, but fragile under the right poison. This one wouldn't just kill, it would drop the warlord in seconds. Muscles seizing, lungs locked tight. Daniel had assassinated before: pirates, bounty hunters, the occasional smuggler who got too curious about his past. But this was different. The Threx warlord was a council figurehead, one of the loudest voices, calling for humanity's extermination. His death wouldn't be a quiet eraser, it would be a detonation. The trick was making it look like a human had done it. The next morning, the warlord was scheduled to meet with a handful of allies before the council session. Private meal in the high guard dining chamber, small, secure, always guarded by 2 elite Threx soldiers. Daniel's stolen credentials as a Carrick officer wouldn't normally get him in, but food deliveries were handled by station service staff, and service staff rarely had their identities checked. Unless they lingered too long, a quick bribe and a borrowed uniform. Later, Daniel walked the polished corridor with a covered tray in his hands. His new appearance was a shadowy outline in the reflective wall panels, short service coat, face partially obscured by the station standard rebreather mask for non-native servers. The guards at the door scanned the tray for explosives. Finding none, they stepped aside. Inside, the warlord sat at the table, surrounded by two other Threx officers. His scaled hands tore into a slab of roasted meat still steaming from the kitchen. His yellow eyes flicked toward Daniel, dismissing him instantly. Perfect. Daniel placed the dishes one by one, his movements efficient but unhurried. The warlord's drink, a thick, dark liquid that smelled faintly of metal, sat untouched at his right hand. That was the target. As Daniel shifted the last plate into position, his sleeve brushed the rim of the warlord's goblet. The motion looked accidental, a simple slip of a clumsy servant. In reality, his fingers had already palmed the ampule, cracking it against the goblet's edge and letting the neurotoxin dissolve invisibly into the drink. Careful servant, the warlord rumbled. Daniel bowed slightly, murmuring the Carrick word for apology, and stepped back. He didn't stay to watch. That would be suspicious. He left the chamber as quietly as he'd entered, walking back into the main corridor and merging with the slow trickle of station staff. The warlord didn't even make it to the council chamber. Half an hour later, the alarm klaxons blared, their high-pulsing tone echoing through the curved halls. Daniel joined the flow of curious onlookers toward the disturbance, keeping his expression blank. The Threx warlord's body was sprawled on the corridor floor outside the dining chamber, one hand clawing at his own throat, eyes wide and bloodshot. His skin had taken on a faint bluish hue. Oxygen deprivation. The two guards knelt over him, but they weren't medics. The toxin worked too quickly for medics to matter anyway. Delegates were already whispering, he was poisoned. Who would dare? It's the humans it has to be. Daniel let the whispers grow. By the time the council convened, the warlord's chair sat empty, his absence like a fresh wound in the chamber's balance. The Three's delegation's second in command, a younger but no less aggressive officer, was practically vibrating with rage. This, the Threx spat, is proof that the humans are here. Only they would strike so cowardly. The Sitha Prime representative leaned back, feigning calm. Perhaps, or perhaps the Threz made one too many enemies in this very chamber. You accuse us, the second in command roared. I accuse no one, the Sitha said, their voice smooth and cold. I simply note that internal politics are often deadlier than any human weapon. The Rajan envoy gurgled agreement, their gelatinous body pulsing. Daniel stayed silent, but his earlier warning about infiltration now hung in the air like a shadow. Every species was looking at every other species with new eyes. Exactly as planned, the rest of the session dissolved into accusations and posturing. By the end, they agreed, reluctantly, and only because public opinion across their controlled systems demanded it to launch a full internal investigation. That meant background checks, genetic scans, interrogation of staff and low-level officers. The Paranoia was no longer just a seed. It was sprouting. That evening Daniel met the cloaked alien in their usual shadowed corner near the maintenance decks. "You did it," the alien said without preamble. Daniel didn't bother to deny it. Now they'll be too busy tearing each other apart to focus on the outer rim. The alien's cybernetic eye warred faintly as it focused on him. "You're playing a dangerous game. The more chaos you create, the harder it will be to move without being caught in the net yourself." Daniel's tone was flat. "I've been in nets before. I know how to cut my way out." The alien gave a small, humorless smile. "Good, because I have the next fragment of the Athena station codes." He handed over another crystal, smaller than the first, but with a denser data pattern. "This one will get you through the second security layer. One more after this and you'll have full access." Daniel pocketed it, and then the alien said, "We find out if your people left anything inside that can burn the council to the ground." Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat at his terminal, the two data crystals slotted into the reader, cross-referencing code fragments, screen filled with cascading lines of encryption, half of it alien, half of it unmistakably human. The last security layer was still beyond his reach, but now he could almost see the door, and behind it the weapons, the blueprints, the knowledge that could make humanity more than a ghost in the galaxy. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something dangerous stirring under the cold layers of his focus. Hope. The council's investigation spread like a slow-moving fire, not fast enough to cause immediate panic, but relentless in its reach. Genetic scans, crew interrogations, background audits. They started with service staff, then junior officers working their way up. It was only a matter of time before they reached the delegates themselves. Daniel kept his movements measured, never hurrying, never looking like a man with something to hide, but every day that passed, the pressure mounted. The station's corridors were busier now. Security drones hovering at choke points, scanning random passers-by for contraband or falsified biometrics. It made accessing his stolen terminal riskier but not impossible. He'd set up 3 different locations for work: his quarters, an unused supply closet in the maintenance deck, and a sealed vent shaft behind a coolant line in the station's lower levels. The heat in there was unbearable, but it was safe from scanners, and safe was worth sweating for. Tonight he used the vent shaft. The 2 data crystals sat in the terminal's twin ports, the code streams dancing across the cracked screen. His eyes scanned for patterns, for fragments of syntax buried between alien encryption. The cloaked alien's second crystal had opened a new section of the Athena station access protocols, a section labeled ES security layer, human code. Tight, deliberate, the kind of encryption that didn't just keep people out, it punished them for trying. Daniel had seen something like it once before. Back when he'd been a soldier during the war, they'd called it dead hand code. If you entered the wrong sequence too many times, the system didn't just lock you out, it wiped itself clean. He worked carefully, fingers moving across the input pad in short bursts, matching key fragments, cross-checking. Check some values, cataloging what he couldn't solve yet. Every step brought him closer to the last barrier. Then his terminal beeped. It wasn't a system alert, it was a proximity ping. His early warning sensor picking up Motion outside the vent shaft, slow, deliberate motion. Someone was standing near the access. Great, Daniel killed the terminal feed. Instantly yanked the crystals free and slipped them into his boot compartment. He listened, a soft hiss of hydraulics. The sound of the great locking bolts. Releasing. Someone was coming in. The intruder's head and shoulders appeared through the narrow opening. Security drone operator in pale gray. Armor, the helmet's visor glowing with scanner light. Daniel didn't hesitate, he pushed forward, jamming his shoulder into the figure's chest to wedge him against the great frame. The operator's hand went for his weapon, but Daniel caught his wrist, twisted hard, and drove the man's head into the metal wall of the shaft. The body went limp. Daniel dragged him fully inside, relieved to see no camera drone hovering behind. He stripped the man's ID badge, shoved the body deep into the side vent, and resealed the grate. The council's net had just brushed him. Next time it might close. The next day the council chamber was tense in a way even the warlord's assassination hadn't achieved. The investigation committee reported inconsistencies in several personnel files. No names were given, but every delegate was already wondering if their own staff were implicated. The Sitha Prime representative suggested accelerating the scans. The Three's second in command demanded public executions for any infiltrators found. Daniel listened, noting the order of targets they planned to investigate. Next, by the end of the week, they'd be at the delegates themselves. He had maybe 3 days, 3 days to get the last code fragment, get off the station, and reach Athena before the council locked down the galaxy in a paranoid frenzy. That night he found the cloaked alien in their shadowed meeting spot. They're closing in, Daniel said. I need the final fragment. The alien's scarred face was unreadable. It's not that simple. The last fragment is in the council archives, deep lock. Multiple guards, and if you take it, they'll know someone broke in. Then we make it look like it wasn't me, Daniel said flatly. The alien considered him for a long moment. If you do this, there's no going back. The moment you touch that archive, the council will go to war with itself. Daniel's voice was steady. That's the point. The council archives were buried 3 levels beneath the chamber, accessible only through a single guarded lift. Daniel's Carrick credentials got him as far as the corridor outside, but the guards, 4 of them today, weren't letting anyone past without high priority clearance. That's where the cloaked alien came in. 2 minutes after Daniel arrived, a muffled explosion rocked the opposite end of the corridor. Smoke poured from a maintenance hatch, followed by the alien stumbling into view, clutching his side, shouting in a language Daniel didn't understand. The guards reacted instantly, 2 rushing toward the smoke, 1 pulling the alien toward the medbay, leaving only a single guard at the lift. Daniel moved. The guard barely had time to register the blur of motion before Daniel's hand clamped over his mouth and the concealed blade slid between the plates of his armor just under the ribs. The body crumpled silently. Daniel dragged it into the shadow of the lift alcove, palmed the man's clearance badge, and swiped it against the reader. The lift door slid open with a hiss. The archive chamber was colder than he expected, lit by a ring of pale blue strips in the floor, transparent stasis. Vaults lined the walls, each containing Sealed data cores suspended in protective fields. The fragment he needed was stored in Vault 9, its surface marked with alien script and the faint insignia of the Council. Daniel bypassed the field's outer layer with the stolen badge, then pulled a portable disruptor from his belt. A few seconds of controlled pulses and the inner field collapsed. The data core floated free. He caught it, slipped it into his satchel, and reactivated the field to hide the theft for as long as possible. But as he turned towards the lift, the alarm blared. The return trip was a blur. The lift ride felt like an eternity, the rising whine of the motors drowned out by the pounding in his ears. When the doors opened, the corridor was already swarming with guards. Daniel didn't stop. He threw a flash charge into their midst, the burst of white light and concussive force sending them sprawling. He ran through the smoke, his borrowed armor making him just another silhouette in the chaos. By the time he reached the residential ring, he'd already ditched the armor and melted into a crowd of evacuees heading for the docking bays. The alarms were station-wide now, the false report of an infiltrator attack herding everyone toward controlled checkpoints. Daniel kept moving. The docking bay was heavily guarded, but the service maintenance locks weren't. He slipped into one, keyed the override, and found himself staring out at the cold stars beyond the station's shield barrier. Somewhere out there, hidden in the dark, was Athena Station. And now he had the keys. The stolen maintenance skiff wasn't built for speed, but it had two things Daniel needed: a cloak transponder and a heat signature that could pass for empty cargo. That and the fact no one looked twice at a maintenance vessel peeling away from a station in chaos. He kept his course slow, steady, not giving the Council's orbital sensors a reason to flag him. Behind him, the station shrank against the endless black, its lights glimmering like the eyes of predators watching their prey escape. Daniel didn't relax. He couldn't. He had a stolen data core in his satchel, 2 crystals in his boot, and an entire Council mobilizing under the belief human infiltrator had just breached their inner sanctum. They weren't wrong. Athena Station was 3 standard days away, but only if he took the straight path, the one that cut through the patrol net. That was suicide. Instead, he charted a looping course through dead systems, skimming asteroid belts and drifting between debris fields. It would take longer, but time wasn't his enemy. Being alive when he got there was. He didn't see another ship until halfway through the second day, when his proximity alarm chirped a low warning. The cloaked alien's vessel. It came out of the dark like a shadow, given shape, small, angular, with a hull pattern designed to scatter scans. Comms crackled. "You move slow," the alien's voice said. "I like breathing." Daniel replied. The alien didn't waste words. "I have coordinates for Athena's approach vector. Without them, you'll set off the outer defenses and turn yourself into debris." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "And you're just giving them to me?" A faint pause. "I've gone too far to watch you die." Now, the coordinates came through as a compressed data packet. Daniel loaded them into the skiff's nav system without breaking eye contact with the aliens. Ship on his monitor. "Meet me at the vault when you're inside," the alien said, then cut the channel. The last approach to Athena Station was invisible. No beacon, no lights, no silhouette against the stars. The coordinates led him to what looked like empty space until the skiff's forward sensors picked up a distortion, a ripple in the background radiation, a cloaking field. Big Daniel keyed in the handshake code from the data crystals. The distortion shimmered, then parted. Like a veil, Athena Station emerged from the dark. It was nothing like the war era orbital platforms he remembered. This was an asteroid, jagged and dark, but hollowed out and reinforced with segmented plating. Shield generators dotted its surface like iron tumors, and a single docking bay mouth yawned open. To accept him, the skiff touched down. With a muted thud, inside the air was stale but breathable. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the hangar's empty decks. No movement, no sound. He stepped out, every sense alert, the satchel heavy at his side. The first checkpoint was a simple console, ancient by galactic standards, but still functional. He slotted the first crystal, then the second, and finally the stolen core from the Council archives. The console hummed, lights flickering as the locks disengaged one by one. A deep rumble shook the hangar as the inner blast door slid open, revealing a corridor that curved out of sight. Daniel moved quickly. The place felt abandoned but not dead, more like a bunker that had been waiting, patient, silent, ready. The corridor led to a central hub where 4 more doors branched out. Above each faint human script was still legible: medical, engineering, command, armory. He went to command first. The door resisted at first, then gave way to a chamber lined with dead consoles and a single intact central terminal. Dust coated the floor, but there were no signs of looting. The council had never been here. He powered up the terminal. It flickered weakly, then bloomed to life, projecting a holographic seal into the air, the insignia of the United Earth Defense Network. He hadn't seen it in decades. Authorization required, a voice said. Female artificial comm. Daniel keyed in the last code sequence from the stolen data core. The hologram pulsed once, then the voice spoke again. Welcome back, Commander Ross. For a moment, Daniel just stood there. He hadn't heard his real name spoken by a human voice since the war. The terminal interface unfolded before him. Lines of human code and archived data streaming past, military records, ship designs, tactical reports, and deeper still, weapons projects that had never left prototype phase. One caught his eye immediately: Project Helios. The files described a weaponized solar manipulation array, something that could destabilize a star's outer layers, triggering massive flares, capable of incinerating everything in a system. It wasn't just a fleet killer. It was a civilization killer. And Athena Station had the full design. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Outside, Daniel's hand went to his boot knife. Before he realized, he recognized the cadence. The cloaked alien stepped into the doorway. You found something, the alien said. Daniel didn't answer. He just turned the terminal so the alien could see the Project Helios schematics rotating in the hollow display. The alien studied it in silence. That would end the council in one strike. Daniel's voice was steady, but there was a hard edge under it. This is more than revenge. This is leverage. With this, we don't have to fight them planet by planet. We can make them too afraid to ever come for humans again. The alien's gaze flicked to him. Or you become the monster they always said you were. Daniel stepped closer, meeting his eyes. They made me remember. The alien didn't argue. For the next hour they worked in silence, transferring the most critical files to encrypted drives, the weapon schematics, the ship upgrade plans, the full list of council outpost locations, every piece of intelligence that could give humanity what was left of it a fighting chance. When they were done, Daniel powered down the terminal and sealed the command chamber. As they headed back toward the hangar, the alien finally spoke. What's your plan now? Daniel didn't hesitate. We take this to what's left of our people, we rebuild. And when the council comes looking, we show them we can erase them from the stars. The alien's scarred mouth twitched. Then I hope your people are ready to follow a commander again. Daniel didn't look back at him. They won't have a choice. When the skiff lifted off from Athena station, the cloaking field shimmered shut behind them, hiding the asteroid. Once more in the endless dark, Daniel set a course away from the patrol net, toward the scattered systems where human survivors were rumored to hide. The drives containing the Helios plans sat in the compartment beside him. Every time his eyes drifted to them, he felt the same cold certainty. The war wasn't over, it had just been waiting. The journey from Athena station to the outer fringe took 6 days, 6 days of running silent, weaving through debris fields, cutting power when long rain patrol sweeps passed too close. The skiff's life support ran lean to keep its signature small. Every breath felt like it came at the cost of another minute of safety. The alien didn't talk much. He spent most of the trip in the skiff's rear compartment, patching his cloak and working on a portable field scrambler. Daniel didn't ask what it was for. Trust between them was functional, not personal. They needed each other, nothing more. When the fringe finally appeared on the nav display, it wasn't a neat, welcoming world. It was a graveyard of rock and ice orbiting a dying star. Tucked into one of the asteroid shadows was the human outpost, a cluster of patch ships welded into the side of a crater hidden from most scanners. Daniel keyed the comms into an old frequency. "This is Ross," he said, letting his voice drop into the tone he hadn't used in years, the one that carried command. "I'm coming in." The outpost dock was cramped, the air thick with the smell of engine grease and recycled oxygen. Armed men and women waited for him, most in scavenged armor, all watching with suspicion that only deepened when the cloaked alien stepped off the skiff. Behind him, a tall, broad-shouldered man pushed through the crowd. His beard was streaked with gray, but his posture was pure military. Ross, his voice was flat, but there was something under it. Disbelief, maybe. Even relief. "You're supposed to be dead." Daniel set the satchel down on the nearest crate. "We're all supposed to be dead." The man's eyes flicked to the alien, then back to Daniel. "And you brought an ally," Daniel said. "The only reason I have this." He unzipped the satchel and pulled out the encrypted drives, setting them on the crate one by one. The crowd shifted, curiosity edging out suspicion. "What is it?" someone asked. Daniel looked at the bearded man. "The end of the council, or the end of us if we don't use it right." The meeting hall was just an old cargo bay repurposed, with tables and mismatched chairs, but it felt like a war room. The leaders of the outpost, military veterans, engineers, even a few ex-civilians who'd clawed their way into command roles. sat in a loose circle, the drives laid. Out in the middle, Daniel explained what they contained, the ship schematics, the outpost coordinates, and finally, Project Helios. By the time he finished, the room was silent. One of the engineers, a thin woman with burned scars across her hands, leaned forward. If this is real, we'd have the ability to destroy any system we wanted. Entire fleets wouldn't matter. It's real, Daniel said, and we're not going to waste it on small targets. We make one strike big enough to make the council afraid to breathe near our territory again. The bearded man frowned. You're talking about genocide. I'm talking about survival. Daniel shot back. If they think there's a chance we can wipe them out, they'll stop hunting us. Fear is the only language they understand. The room was divided. Half of them looked ready to follow him to war. The other half looked like they were staring at the beginnings of a nightmare. The debate was cut short by the sound of the outpost's proximity alarms. Daniel was on his feet, instantly crossing to the wall console. A scan showed 3 ships on approach. Small, fast, and flying council transponders. The bearded man swore. They found us. Daniel's mind went to work in seconds. The council wouldn't send small ships unless they thought they could take the outpost clean. That meant this wasn't a random sweep. This was a targeted hunt. And that meant someone had talked. In the hangar, crews scrambled to power up the outpost's defensive guns. Little more than salvage ship cannons bolted into the rock, but better than nothing. Daniel's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for the weak link. The cloaked alien appeared at his side. They know who you are, he said quietly. Daniel turned his head sharply. What? I intercepted a transmission before we docked. They've identified you as the infiltrator. They know about Athena Station. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we can't let them leave. The first council ship breached the perimeter a minute later, guns lighting up the darkness. The outpost's cannons answered, their impacts shattering across the council ship's shields. The battle was brutal and close. No room for retreat. Daniel grabbed a rifle from a nearby rack and moved to the lower gun deck, picking off boarding troops as they tried to cut into the outpost's outer hull. The alien fought beside him, his cloak flickering as he darted between cover, dropping soldiers with precise surgical shots. The council troops were disciplined, but they weren't prepared for the kind of feral resistance humans could mount when cornered. By the time the last of them broke and ran for their shuttles, the hangar floor was slick with blood and the air wire of scorched metal. 2 of the 3 council ships were gone, destroyed in the fight. The third limped away on a damaged drive, bleeding air from a ruptured hull. Daniel watched it vanish into the dark. He knew it would go straight back to the council with everything they'd seen. There would be no hiding now. Back in the meeting hall, the surviving leaders gathered again, faces grim. They'll come back, the bearded man said. And next time they won't send scouts. They'll send fleets. Then we hit them first, Daniel said. Room went still. You want to use it, the engineer said, nodding toward the drives. Daniel met every gaze in the room. We've been running for decades, hiding, dying. One colony at a time. This ends now. We take Helios, we make a strike. They'll never forget, and we tell them if they come for us again, we erase them. The bearded man leaned back, eyes narrowing. And if we become the thing we hate? Daniel didn't look away. Then at least we become something they fear. By the time the meeting ended, there was no consensus, but there was momentum. Enough of the outpost's leaders were willing to back him that preparations began before the vote was even called. Ships were fueled, engineers started adapting the Helios plans to what they had, and scouts were sent to find the perfect target. Daniel stood in the hangar watching crews work the alien beside him. You know this path doesn't end with peace, the alien said. I know, Daniel replied, but it ends with us alive. Far above, beyond the asteroid's thin shielding, the stars burned cold and bright. Somewhere out there the council was already moving. Let them come. Hangar buzzed with controlled chaos. Engineers crawled over ships like ants on a carcass, welding, plating, swapping out cores, calibrating drives. In one corner, the Helios prototype, still skeletal, a web of conduits and emitter arrays, lay on a cradle of reinforced steel. It didn't look like the weapon that could shatter a star, not yet. Daniel stood with a data pad in hand, eyes locked on the readouts. The numbers were holding. The power distribution matrix was stable. They had one shot at this. Helios would either work exactly as intended or tear itself apart before firing. The bearded man from the council stepped up beside him. Targets locked, he said quietly. Council Fleet Assembly Yard, Sector Delta 7. It's where they're building the next generation of carriers. Daniel didn't look away from the data pad. Perfect. We hit them before those ships ever leave dry dock. The man's voice dropped lower. You realize there will be civilians in that system. There are civilians in every system they control, Daniel said flatly, and every one of them lives under the same boot we've been bleeding under for 50 years. We don't get the luxury of surgical strikes. The man didn't reply. He just walked away, leaving Daniel alone with the hum of welding torches and the slow thrum of the prototype's power core. By the time the fleet assembled, it wasn't much to look at. Half a dozen retrofit freighters, 3 old war frigates scavenged from graveyards, and the cloaked alien small sleek ship that would carry Helios itself. It was all they had, but it was enough. The crews knew this wasn't a campaign. There would be no slow grind, no second strikes. This was one blow swung with every ounce of strength they had left. Daniel boarded the alien's vessel, walking the narrow corridor to the control deck where the Helios controls had been integrated. The alien was already there, fingers moving across the firing sequence calibrations. You're certain about this target? The alien asked without looking up. Certain, Daniel said. Destroying their fleet yard cripples them. They'll be too busy scrambling to rebuild to chase us. The alien's cybernetic eye glowed faintly. Or they'll dedicate everything to hunting you. Daniel strapped into the co-pilot seat. Either way they'll be reacting to us, not the other way around. The journey to Delta 7 took 30 hours. Under full burn, the fleet traveled in staggered formation, avoiding predictable patterns. When the council's assembly yard came into view, even Daniel had to stop for a moment. The yard wasn't just a station, it was a city in space. Massive carrier frames hung in Zerog cradles, skeletal now but already bristling with gun ports. Hundreds of smaller vessels swarmed around them like worker bees, moving parts, welding armor. The alien adjusted their heading, bringing Helios into position beyond the system's outer Asteroid belt. We're in range, he said. Daniel keyed the sequence into the console. The Helios array hummed to life, the vibration deep enough to rattle through his bones. Warning lights bathed the cabin in amber. Charging, Daniel said. 2 minutes to full power. In the yard, the council fleet hadn't noticed them yet. The asteroid belt hid their heat signatures, masking them as drifting rock. Daniel's eyes stayed locked on the power readout. 1 minute 30 seconds. A proximity alarm blared. One of the human frigates had been scanned. A patrol ship had wandered too close. The comms crackled with the bearded man's voice. We've been spotted. Patrols calling for reinforcements. Daniel didn't hesitate. Hold them off. Keep them away from us until we fire. 1 minute. The frigates moved to intercept the patrol, weapons flashing. In the dark, the first enemy ship went up in a burst of fire, but more were incoming from the yard. The humans were outnumbered. 30 seconds. The alien's hands danced across the controls, adjusting the firing arc to compensate for the yard's slow rotation. 15 seconds. Daniel felt the air vibrate in his chest. As Helios reached full charge, the emitter arrays glowing white hot. Fire, Daniel said. The alien hit the final key. Helios roared, not with sound but with light, a concentrated beam lancing out, invisible at first, then flaring as it struck the systems. Star. For 3 seconds nothing happened. Then the star flinched. A wave of plasma boiled outward, the corona swelling, light intensifying until the whole system seemed to burn brighter. On the tactical display, Daniel watched the wavefront race toward the assembly yard. Ships scattered, engines flaring in panic, but there was no outrunning a star's fury. The first flare hit like the hand of a god. The yard's outer structures vaporized instantly. Carrier frames twisted and melted. Smaller ships were hurled out of orbit or torn apart. In the wash of radiation and heat, the comms filled with overlapping voices, screaming, shouting, cutting out in bursts of static, then silence. When the display cleared, the assembly yard was gone. The human fleet didn't wait to admire the destruction. Engines roared as they burned away from the system, pushing drives to their limits. Patrol ships gave chase, but the chaos Helios had unleashed bought them time. Hours later, deep in the empty dark, they finally cut power and drifted. No pursuit, no signals, just the sound of their own breathing. Daniel sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring at the black beyond the canopy. His hands were steady, but his chest felt like it was made of stone. The alien finally spoke. You got what you wanted. Daniel didn't answer right away. His mind was still full of the flare, the way it had consumed everything, the way the comms had gone silent so suddenly. Yes, he said at last, and now they'll never forget what humans can do. Back at the fringe outpost, the reception was mixed. Some cheered, calling him the man who had given humanity its first real victory in half a century. Others couldn't look him in the eye, their faces pale at the scale of the destruction. The bearded man pulled him aside. You've made us a target for the rest of our lives, he said. We were already targets, Daniel replied. Now we're dangerous ones. 2 days later, the first council broadcast reached the fringe. It was short, a single statement delivered by the council's current head to the human known as Daniel Ross. You will be found, you will be erased. And your people will watch it happen. Daniel shut the broadcast off. His reflection in the dark screen didn't look like a soldier anymore. It looked like something sharper. They'll come, the alien said quietly. I'm counting on it, Daniel replied. Because now the war wasn't about survival, now it was about who would outlast the other, and Daniel Ross had just made sure the galaxy would remember that humans didn't die quietly.